5 real-life horror stories more disturbing than fiction. Welcome to DTC, Dark Timeless Creeps, where the shadows come to life and the eerie whispers from the past echo in the dark corners of the world. In today's video, we're diving deep into the unknown with 5 disturbing, true, scary stories that will leave you questioning what's real and what's not. From chilling encounters with the supernatural to twisted tales of terror that happened right in our world, these stories are not for the faint of heart. Prepare yourself, because once you step into the darkness, there's no turning back. Are you ready to face the horrors that lurk just beyond the edge of your comfort zone? Let's begin. Story 1. The Demon Kid. I'm going to tell you about a kid you never want to meet, no matter how curious you are. I learned this lesson the hard way, but there's one thing I'll tell you right now. Don't ever say his name 3 times. If you do, I can't promise you'll ever be the same again. This isn't just a creepy story, it's a warning. It all started with Patrick. He was one of those kids who never seemed to fit in. You know the type, the ones who always seem to stand apart, like they're not really part of the world around them. He was awkward, quiet, and frankly a little strange. He didn't talk to anyone, didn't make friends, and had this cold, unsettling presence. But what made Patrick stand out the most wasn't his social awkwardness. It was his constant claim that he wasn't human. He called himself a demon. He would say it so casually, like it was nothing. "I'm not like you," he'd mutter. "I'm a demon." Most of us just thought it was some weird phase, a desperate attempt for attention, but we couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. One day, we were sitting in the cafeteria when I heard it again. Patrick, standing by himself near the window, just staring outside. Ben, being Ben, couldn't resist asking, "Hey, Patrick, why are you always by yourself? You don't have any friends or something?" Patrick turned slowly, his face emotionless, but his eyes were different. They were cold, distant, like they saw through everything. Without a smile, he simply replied in a flat, eerie tone, "I don't need friends. I'm a demon." We all laughed it off. But something in the air shifted that day. It wasn't the words, but the way he said them, like he believed them, like he wasn't just playing some part. And that's when the strange things started happening. The first time it happened was in the library. Lisa, Ben, and I were sitting in the back, browsing through books. The room was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like someone's listening. Then, out of nowhere, the temperature dropped. It wasn't subtle. One moment it was warm, and the next it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I glanced up and I saw it. A shadow moving across the walls like it had a life of its own. It wasn't cast by anything, but it was there, creeping around, shifting with no source. Then a voice, soft at first, whispered, "Patrick." It wasn't any of us. We froze. The voice sounded like it was coming from the shadows, from everywhere at once. Then it spoke again. "Patrick, Patrick, Patrick." That's when the air seemed to hold its breath. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. And just when we thought it was over, the door to the library slammed open, and there he stood, Patrick. But this time there was something different. His face was pale, like the life had been drained from it. His eyes were dark, deeper than I had ever seen them before. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, staring at us. His presence seemed to consume the room, like the shadows were drawn to him. We couldn't explain what was happening, but we knew. We knew something was wrong. From that point on, the strange occurrences grew. Every time someone said his name 3 times, something unexplainable happened. It started small, books flying off shelves, lights flickering uncontrollably, strange sounds echoing in empty halls. But then it escalated. One day during gym class, we were just finishing up a game of basketball when the lights flickered again, then went out completely. The gym was plunged into darkness, the only sound the heavy breathing of our classmates. Then the floor began to shake. It was subtle at first, like a distant rumble, but it grew louder, like something huge was moving beneath us. The air became thick with a static charge, and the temperature dropped so fast we could see our breath in front of us. And that's when we heard it. Footsteps, heavy, relentless. They were getting closer. We all turned, but no one was there. The door to the locker room creaked open, and in stepped Patrick. But his appearance, his presence, was nothing like we had seen before. He looked different, like his body was shifting, his form bending and stretching in ways it shouldn't. His skin was ashen, almost translucent, and his eyes were black, bottomless pits that seemed to draw in every ounce of light around them. "Patrick," someone whispered from the back of the room, and as if on cue, the walls around us groaned and cracked. The shadows in the corners of the gym twisted and writhed like living things. Patrick smiled, but it wasn't a smile. It was a grin, stretched too wide, like it didn't belong on a human face. And that's when we realized this wasn't just some weird kid who liked to play make-believe. This wasn't just a troubled teenager. Patrick was exactly what he said he was. He was a demon, and his power grew stronger every time someone said his name. Each time the name Patrick was spoken, reality itself seemed to bend and break. We tried everything to stop it. We tried to avoid speaking his name, tried to escape the school, but it was no use. Patrick wasn't just haunting us, he was in us, like a parasite feeding on our fear. Those of us who got too close, those of us who talked too much became his, changed forever. We were drawn into his world, a world where shadows lived and breathed, and where nightmares walked in broad daylight. But here's the kicker. If you're reading this and you think it's just a story, just some scary fiction, think again. Because all it takes is 3 words. 3 words that will change your life forever. 3 words that will summon Patrick. 3 words, Patrick, Patrick, Patrick. And once you've said them, there's no going back. You'll never escape the shadows again. Trust me, I know. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 2, Dugout Incident, the true horror behind the name. It all started innocently enough, one of those lazy weekend afternoons when my friends and I were gathered at the park, indulging in a game of baseball. The sun was bright, the air warm, and everything felt carefree. We laughed and joked about random things, as we often did when the subject of Patrick came up. It was a casual mention at first, just a part of our usual banter. But little did we know that calling his name would set in motion something that none of us would ever forget. Patrick. He was one of those people you didn't really know, but somehow you couldn't escape noticing. There was something off about him. He wasn't part of our inner circle, but he was around enough to make you wonder. Tall, with a strangely unsettling presence that never seemed to fade. His eyes had this unnatural intensity, like he was always watching, even when you weren't looking at him. But we never really thought much of it until that afternoon. It all began when Gabby, one of my closest friends, casually mentioned that Patrick might have a crush on her. I remember the way she said it, half laughing, half embarrassed. We all teased her about it, joking that Patrick was secretly pining for her from afar. "Oh, please," she said, rolling her eyes, trying to laugh it off. "He's not my type." But of course, we wouldn't let it go that easily. We began to joke about it more, making exaggerated comments about how Patrick must have been writing love poems or secretly watching her from the shadows. The teasing became more ridiculous with each passing moment, and before we knew it, we were all in on the joke, laughing harder than ever. In a moment of impulsive amusement, I suggested a ridiculous dare. Why don't we call out Patrick's name 3 times, like in those old horror stories? Maybe he'll appear and tell us how he feels about Gabby. Everyone laughed, some hesitantly, but we all went along with it. Gabby shrugged, playing along with a nervous smile, clearly not thinking anything would come of it. We stood in a circle, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the grass. All right, here we go. Patrick, Patrick, Patrick. As soon as the last Patrick left my lips, something strange happened. The atmosphere shifted. The air grew still, colder, like a heavy weight had suddenly settled on the park. The wind stopped. The laughter died. It was as if time itself had frozen, and in that silence I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I looked around at my friends. Gabby was pale, her eyes wide with confusion. I could see the unease in their faces, but we all tried to brush it off, laughing nervously. It must have been a fluke, right? Some coincidence. But deep down, I felt the strange tension in the air, like we had crossed some invisible line. And then it happened. At the far end of the field, I saw him. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but there he was, standing in the shadows near the dugout. Patrick. But this wasn't the same Patrick I'd seen around school. This figure was different, darker, almost inhuman. His features were shadowed, but the intense glow of his eyes pierced through the dimming light of the evening, locking onto us with an unsettling precision. Before anyone could react, he started to move toward us, slowly, deliberately. And then, as if on cue, he raised something in his hand, something that gleamed in the fading sunlight. A baseball bat. But this wasn't a casual, everyday bat. It looked heavy, almost like a weapon forged for something far more sinister. He gripped it tightly, his knuckles white, his eyes never leaving us. "Is that Patrick?" Gabby whispered, her voice barely audible. I couldn't answer. My heart was pounding in my chest. There was something in the air, something off. This wasn't some harmless joke anymore. We had awoken something. And just as quickly as he appeared, Patrick, if that's even what he was, vanished. One moment he was standing there, eyes locked on ours, and the next he was gone, like smoke dissipating into the wind. We stood there in stunned silence, each of us trying to make sense of what had just happened. There was no explanation, no reason. Patrick had vanished as mysteriously as he had appeared. None of us spoke for a few moments. It was like the whole world had shifted. Finally, I forced a laugh, but it was hollow, nervously so. "It's just a prank, right?" I said, more to myself than anyone else. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. This was no prank. For the next few days, the events of that afternoon seemed to haunt us, like a bad dream that lingered even after we woke up. But it wasn't just the appearance of Patrick that troubled me. It was the fact that his name, once spoken, seemed to carry weight now, like we had opened some kind of door we shouldn't have. Each time we mentioned his name after that day, the atmosphere around us seemed to change. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a prickling unease, a sensation of being watched. And then, as if the very act of saying his name summoned him, strange things began to happen. The next time I saw Gabby, she looked exhausted, her eyes sunken and tired. "I don't know what's going on," she confessed to me in a quiet, trembling voice. "Last night I could have sworn I saw him, standing at my window, staring inside. I don't know how he got there." I froze, a cold shiver running down my spine. "Are you serious? He was really there?" Gabby nodded, her face pale. "I heard his voice too. It said my name, I don't know how, but he knew where I lived." The more we spoke, the more we realized that something had changed. Something had been unleashed when we joked about calling Patrick's name. And the worst part was, he wasn't just appearing randomly, He seemed to be seeking us out, each of us in turn. The more we thought about it, the more it became clear there was no escaping him. One night, while I was walking home alone, I felt a presence behind me. My footsteps echoed in the empty street, and for a moment I felt like I was being followed. I quickened my pace, but the footsteps matched mine. I turned around and saw nothing. But then, as I turned back, there was a shadow at the end of the street, standing under the street lamp. I couldn't make out the figure at first, but the familiar sensation of being watched crept over me. My heart raced as I slowly walked towards it, and just as I reached the end of the block, the figure stepped into the light. It was Patrick, or whatever he had become. His eyes were glowing, no longer human. His smile, twisted and cold, sent a surge of terror through me. "Don't call my name again," he whispered, his voice like a low growl that sent a chill through my body. Before I could respond, he was gone, vanished into the night. That was the last time any of us dared to speak his name. We never saw Patrick again after that night, but we all knew one thing. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed, and some names once spoken can never be forgotten. We were never the same again. And if you ever find yourself tempted to call out a name 3 times, remember this: some things are better left undisturbed. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 3, The Uninvited Visitor, a terrifying true story. I never expected that night at Laura's house to be anything other than ordinary. We'd spent the evening talking about everything and nothing, our usual routine. But what started as a normal evening would quickly spiral into a nightmare, one that would haunt me for years to come. It all began innocently enough. Laura and I sat in her living room, sipping our drinks and reminiscing about old friends and strange coincidences. I don't even remember how the topic came up, but suddenly Laura mentioned the name Patrick. She spoke about him casually, as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "Have you ever heard the story Patrick told about the road trip he took?" Laura asked, laughing as she swirled her drink. I nodded, trying to recall the details. "Yeah, I think I remember, but it's been ages since I heard it." She laughed again, the sound light and carefree, but then she said it once more. "Remember when Patrick told us about that place? What a trip." I smiled weakly, trying to piece together the memories. But something felt off. I didn't know it at the time, but that second mention of Patrick would set the course for what was to come. It wasn't until she spoke his name a 3rd time that things began to get strange. "Patrick could never explain how he ended up at that place, could he?" she mused aloud. I froze. 3 times. 3 times she had mentioned his name in less than 5 minutes. It was a subtle thing, almost unnoticeable, but now that I was aware, the air in the room seemed to change. I felt a slight unease crawl up my spine, like the room had become colder, though the evening was warm. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was nothing, just a coincidence. But the moment the doorbell rang, the unease I had been trying to suppress suddenly bloomed into full-blown dread. The sound was too sharp, too sudden. It cut through the soft hum of the conversation and made everything around us feel off, like something was out of place. I glanced at Laura, and she looked back at me, her expression unreadable. "Who could that be?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know," she replied softly, already standing up. "But it's strange. It's so late for visitors." She walked toward the door. I stayed where I was, my heart racing, my eyes fixed on the door as if I already knew what was about to happen. When Laura opened it, I couldn't believe my eyes. Standing there, just beyond the threshold, was a man I didn't recognize at first. His appearance was unsettling, and it wasn't just his unkempt clothes or his pale skin. It was something else, something I couldn't put my finger on. He was tall, with sharp features, and his eyes, they didn't look human. There was something unnerving about the way they glinted, almost too bright in the dim light. For a moment, time seemed to stop, and the air grew heavier with each passing second. He just stood there, staring at us. "Patrick?" Laura whispered, almost as if she couldn't believe her own voice. The words escaped her lips before she could stop them, and I could see her face pale as the realization hit her. The man, no, Patrick, nodded slowly, his movements deliberate, almost too controlled. Then, in a voice that seemed to echo unnaturally in the space around us, he spoke. "I've been summoned," he said simply, his eyes never leaving Laura's. There was a strange weight to his words, a gravity that made the room feel as if it was closing in on us. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I could feel the temperature in the room plummet. I was speechless. My mind raced, trying to process what I was hearing. "Summoned?" Laura stared at him, confusion and disbelief written across her face. "What do you mean you've been summoned?" Patrick didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his presence filling the room like a dark cloud. He walked past us, his gaze never wavering, and settled into a chair by the window, as though he had every right to be there. There was something about the way he moved, fluid, unnatural, that sent a chill down my spine. It felt as though the very act of him entering the room had shifted something in the space around us, and the normal, comfortable atmosphere was gone. The air was thick, charged with an energy that felt wrong. I glanced at Laura, but she seemed just as frozen as I was. We didn't speak for several moments. All I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears and the distant tick of the clock on the wall. The silence stretched on, unbearable, until finally I spoke. "Patrick, why are you here? Why did you come?" My voice came out shaky, a far cry from the confident tone I usually carried. The words felt foreign in my mouth, but they were the only thing I could think to say. He tilted his head slightly, as if considering my question. "You called me," he said softly. "You called my name 3 times, and now here I am." I stared at him, trying to wrap my mind around his words. We called him? How could that be? Laura and I hadn't done anything. We'd only mentioned his name in casual conversation, hadn't we? It was then that a terrible realization began to settle over me. What had happened just a moment before he arrived wasn't a coincidence. We had summoned him, whether we intended to or not, and now there was no turning back. I looked around, trying to make sense of it. Was he a ghost? Some kind of entity? His pale complexion, his strange demeanor, everything about him screamed otherworldly. There was no rational explanation for any of it, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that something far darker was at play here. Patrick didn't seem in any hurry to explain further. Instead, he simply stared at us, as if he knew exactly what we were thinking. It was as if he was toying with us, watching our confusion and fear grow. But it wasn't just confusion anymore, it was terror. There was something fundamentally wrong with the way he was looking at us, as though he knew our deepest secrets, our darkest fears, and was waiting for the right moment to reveal them. I couldn't take it anymore. "What do you want from us?" I asked, my voice a mix of fear and desperation. I wasn't sure what kind of answer I was hoping for, but at that moment I just needed something to make sense of this nightmare. Patrick didn't smile, but his eyes seemed to glint with something, amusement, maybe, or perhaps something darker. "I've come because I was called, and now I am here." His words sent a ripple of unease through the room. "But my visit, it's only just beginning. A cold shiver ran through me. The walls seemed to close in, and the world outside the room felt distant, unreal. I wanted to run, to escape, but my body felt frozen in place. There was no escape from this. Not now. In that moment, everything that had seemed normal just hours before, our conversation, the laughter, the drinks, felt like it had happened in another life. A life before we called Patrick, and now nothing would ever be the same again. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Story 4. Johnny's Doubt, a disturbing, true, scary story. I can still remember that night vividly. The faint glow of the living room lights flickered in the background as the air inside Johnny's house grew colder, heavier, almost suffocating. It wasn't just the cold. There was something else in the atmosphere, something unspoken that made everyone in the room uneasy. The house felt alive with whispers, and not in a good way. We were sitting around, chatting about the usual things, trying to make sense of our tired lives until someone, I think it was Dave, brought up the name, Patrick. The moment his name was said, the air shifted. We all knew about Patrick. Everyone had heard the stories, and none of us dared to say his name too often. In fact, there was this unspoken rule between us. You could talk about anything, but you never mention Patrick's name 3 times. That was the rule. The one rule we all respected without question. But Johnny, always the skeptic, the one who liked to test the boundaries, broke the rule. His voice cut through the tension in the room like a blade. Patrick. 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 A chill ran down my spine as the words left his lips. It wasn't just that he dared to say it, it was the way he said it, with a mocking tone, almost daring the universe to show its hand. He didn't believe the old superstition. Johnny was always the one to laugh off the strange things we'd heard in stories, the unexplained noises, the dark whispers in the dead of night. He was the one who always called it a bunch of nonsense. But as soon as those 3 syllables slipped out of his mouth, something shifted. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It wasn't a draft, it wasn't the wind, it was something else, something unnatural. For a moment, there was silence. No one dared to speak, not even to breathe. It felt like the walls of the room had closed in on us. The air grew thick with tension, and then suddenly the sound of something scraping against the window. It was a subtle sound at first, almost like a distant wind, but it came closer and closer until it was unmistakable. Thump, thump, thump. Each sound hit the window with a hollow, thudding force. I felt my heart race. Johnny, ever the brave one, stood up quickly, brushing it off with a forced laugh. "It's probably just a bird or something," he said, though his voice faltered, but deep down, we all knew that wasn't a bird. The scraping stopped. A deep, unsettling silence followed. My eyes darted to the window, and I saw something, a shadow, a figure standing just beyond the garden fence, silhouetted against the dim light of the backyard. The shape was wrong. "Johnny," I whispered, my voice shaking. "There's someone out there." Johnny turned, his expression unreadable. He walked toward the window, his steps hesitant. But I could see the doubt in his eyes, the kind of doubt you get when you think you're being pranked, but at the same time, you know something's terribly off. He pushed the curtains aside slowly, and for a split second, everything stood still. Time seemed to freeze. Standing there, just outside the fence, was Patrick, or what I thought was Patrick. He was no longer the person we remembered or the person we joked about. This figure was something else. His face was hollow, gaunt, his eyes black voids that seemed to draw in all the light. He wore a faint, twisted smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was more of a grimace, a smile that promised nothing but dread. I could feel my breath catching in my throat. There was no way this was real. It had to be some twisted joke, right? "Johnny, are you messing with me?" I asked, though my voice betrayed me. I was terrified. Johnny, who had been so confident just moments ago, now stood frozen. "This isn't funny, guys," he muttered, his face pale. But his eyes were locked on the figure outside the window, and I saw his hands tremble. Patrick, if it was him, just stood there watching us. His presence was suffocating, like the very air was being sucked out of the room. And then, without a word, without any sudden movement, he slowly raised his hand and pointed directly at Johnny. His finger wasn't just pointing, it hovered, as if it had no weight, as if it wasn't real. Johnny froze, his body stiffening. The rest of us were too paralyzed with fear to move, too stunned to even look away. I wanted to scream, to shout for him to run, but no sound escaped my throat. My heart hammered in my chest. My skin prickled with cold. Then came the laughter. A low, guttural laugh that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. It was a laugh that came from deep within the earth, the kind that felt older than time itself. And it wasn't just the sound of it, it was everywhere. It filled the room, reverberating in the walls, vibrating through the floor, and I could feel it deep in my bones. Patrick wasn't just outside, he was in the room, inside my head. Johnny's voice broke the spell, trembling. "What is this? Is this a prank? Is someone behind this?" He yelled, but there was no response, just the eerie silence that followed. I turned to the others. Dave looked as pale as I felt, but he didn't speak. None of us spoke. We just stared at Johnny, then back at the figure in the yard, who was still staring at us with those empty eyes. He knew what Johnny had done. Johnny rushed to the door, yelling at us to stay inside. "I'm going out there. This is enough. I've had it with you guys trying to scare me. This is just a setup." I wanted to warn him. I wanted to shout at him to stop, but I couldn't. Johnny opened the door and stepped out into the yard, his figure becoming one with the shadows. The rest of us stayed frozen, our eyes glued to the window, watching as Johnny advanced toward Patrick. The moment he stepped closer, the shadow moved. It wasn't a person anymore. It was something else. It was as if the shadow was alive, growing, shifting, and then Patrick disappeared, just like that, vanished into thin air. Johnny stopped in his tracks, his face a mask of confusion and anger. He turned back to us, his eyes wide, his mouth agape. "This is a sick joke. I swear I'm gonna..." Before he could finish, a voice, cold and hollow, echoed from behind him. "Johnny, I'm waiting for you." He whipped around, but there was no one. Nothing but the empty backyard. The figure was gone. We all rushed outside to meet him, but Johnny was gone. No trace, no sign. The next day we called the police. We searched the yard, but there was nothing. Patrick had disappeared. But the thing that shook me the most was the faint, lingering echo of that voice. It was in my head. It wouldn't leave. Patrick, he was still out there. And every night, without fail, I hear it, that eerie, deep laugh, as if he's watching us from the shadows, from behind the walls, from inside my mind. Never doubt the stories you hear, because when you do, Patrick will find you. And when he does, you will never escape. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 5. The Haunting of Patrick, A true, scary story. I still remember every single detail of that night. The way the air felt unnervingly still, the oppressive silence that settled over the house, and the eerie sense of dread that clung to the room like a thick fog. It's a feeling I won't ever be able to shake. It all started out so normally. I was home alone in my small suburban house, taking care of my little cousin Patrick while his parents were out. I didn't think much of it at the time. Patrick was a quiet, well-behaved child, barely 8 years old. We spent the evening playing in the living room. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, absorbed in his toy cars, while I was lounging on the couch, scrolling through my phone. But then something strange happened. I heard him whispering to himself. At first I thought it was just the usual mumbling of a child lost in his own world. But then I realized he wasn't just talking to himself. He was saying something out loud, repeating a name over and over again. Patrick, Patrick, Patrick. I froze. My stomach tightened. There was something unnerving about the way he said it. It wasn't the kind of innocent repetition I would expect from a child. No, this was different. There was an edge to his voice, a tone of something dark, something familiar. I looked up at him, my heart suddenly racing. His eyes were wide and staring at the empty space in front of him, like he was seeing something I couldn't. "Patrick?" I asked cautiously, trying to sound calm, though my voice shook. He didn't respond at first. His gaze remained fixed, locked onto nothing. Then he turned to me slowly, his face completely unreadable. "Don't worry," he whispered almost too softly for me to hear. "It's just Patrick." I felt a chill wash over me. Patrick? That was his name, but I didn't understand what he meant. Who was he talking about? And why did I feel so unsettled by his words? Trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine, I went back to mindlessly scrolling through my phone. But that's when I heard it, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. A soft, shuffling sound. It was coming from outside, somewhere near the window. I glanced up, and that's when I saw it. A shadow. It was tall, like a person, but the figure was unnervingly still, standing just outside the window. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but then the figure moved, slowly, like it was watching us. My pulse quickened. A sense of dread rushed over me, and I stood frozen, unable to tear my eyes away from the figure outside. It wasn't just the stillness that unnerved me, it was the way the shadow seemed to loom, as though it had no right to be there. I turned to Patrick, my voice trembling. "Do you see that? Out there?" He didn't seem alarmed. In fact, he was just sitting there looking at me with those strange, wide eyes. He spoke in a hushed tone again, as if the figure was nothing to worry about. "Don't be scared. It's just Patrick," he said, as if the answer was obvious. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my mind racing. Patrick? But this didn't make sense. Who was outside, and why was Patrick so calm about it? Why did he seem to know something I didn't? I took a tentative step toward the window, my hands shaking. I peered through the curtains, but I couldn't make out any details. The figure remained in the same position, still and lifeless. It was as though it was waiting for something or someone. Seconds felt like minutes. I glanced back at Patrick, whose expression was eerily calm, almost too calm. He wasn't worried. Why wasn't he worried? Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the shadowy figure vanished. One moment it was there, and the next, nothing. Silence. The kind of silence that presses down on you, suffocating and oppressive. I tried to calm myself. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, or some odd reflection. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The air had shifted. It was colder, and I could feel the eyes of something dark, watching me. I was about to turn away when I heard it again, this time louder, closer, footsteps, outside. I hesitated for a moment, then moved to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I opened it, step by cautious step, dreading what I might find. What I saw left me paralyzed. In the yard, scattered across the grass, were all of my personal belongings, my books, my clothes, my things. They were all there, neatly arranged, like someone had taken care to set them out. But what made my blood run cold was the sight of them wrapped in something familiar. It was a hoodie I recognized instantly. It was Patrick's. I didn't know how or why his hoodie had ended up wrapped around my belongings, but there they were, in the middle of the yard, like a bizarre display, as if someone was trying to tell me something. The hoodie, with its familiar colors and worn fabric, felt like an omen, a dark, twisted omen. I turned to look at Patrick, hoping for some explanation, but when I glanced back at him, his expression was completely different. His face had lost its innocence, replaced with something darker. His eyes, once wide with childish curiosity, now seemed empty, like he wasn't there at all. He just stood there staring at me with an unsettling calmness, as if he had known this would happen all along. I wanted to scream, to run, to get out of that house, but I couldn't move. I couldn't make sense of anything. Was it possible that Patrick had somehow orchestrated this? Or was there something more sinister at play here? I glanced at the hoodie again, the fabric now twisting in the cold wind. There was no explanation for what I was seeing, no rational way to explain how my belongings had ended up outside. My mind raced. Patrick. Who was Patrick, really? And then it hit me. Patrick wasn't a normal child. Something was wrong. But what was it? And how had I not seen it before? I don't know how long I stood there, frozen with fear. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house any longer. Something dark, something malevolent, was watching me. And the name Patrick, it no longer sounded innocent. It was a curse, a warning, a reminder that not everything is as it seems. To this day, I can't shake the memory of that night, the shadow outside the window, or the strange, unsettling calm that had overtaken Patrick. I still don't know what happened. Was it a ghost, a demon, a trick of the mind? All I know is this. After that night, I never saw Patrick again. And I still wonder, was he ever even real? As the darkness deepens and the stories grow more unsettling, we venture deeper into the unknown together. Each chilling tale brings us closer to the eerie truths lurking just beyond the veil of reality. The terror doesn't stop here, it only gets worse. Subscribe to DTC, the Place of the Brave now, and stay on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss what's lurking in the shadows next. Hit that notification bell and prepare for the next terrifying chapter. Remember, in the world of DTC, the creeps are always waiting, and they never rest. Good luck sleeping tonight.